What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to another Monster Hunter video. In today's video, I'm going to be making a tier list, a weapon tier list that defines what weapon is the easiest to use and pick up. As we all know, Monster Hunter Wilds demo is coming out tomorrow night, and this video is for people who are new to the Monster Hunter game. Even if you're old in the Monster Hunter game, maybe you started out with Monster Hunter 1, even if you started in Monster Hunter World, wherever you are, I hope this video helps you decide what weapon you want to use in the game. Now, with that being said, this is my tier list, so this is my personal opinion, and if you do not like something that I say, that is okay. You don't have to like everything that I say because this is my personal opinion. With that being said, let's get to this tier list. Okay, so I have my tier list here. The tiers are easy to use, simple but hard to master, complex. Now, when I'm explaining all of these weapons, I will say things like build, or I will say, maybe it's a multi-layered weapon or something like that, and I will take the time to explain what I'm talking about. I also have all 14 weapons up here from the Monster Hunter YouTube page here. We're going to watch the video, and then I'm going to explain and just kind of talk about the weapon itself, and then we will rank the weapon, and then we will go about it that way. Now, the first weapon that we're going to cover today is going to be the dual blades. Okay, now as we take a look at this trailer, I'm also going to talk while it's going on in the background. The dual blade it's quite a simple weapon. You just have two blades, and it's not super complex. I mean, it's very straightforward. You're attacking the monster. Yes, there's different modes like demon mode, which just make you attack a little bit faster. But in my personal opinion, these things are very, very simple to understand and pick up. The mechanics of this weapon aren't super crazy. And when I say the mechanics, I just say the demon mode that it has is a mechanic. But outside of that, the only thing you really need to focus on is just being as fast as you can, dodging the monster and attacking it head on. And you do have to worry about building the weapon, of course, but it's a very simple weapon to build. And when I say build, I'm talking about the skills that you have from the armor pieces that you gain, because every armor piece that in this game has specific skills on it. And some of the skills that you'll need for the dual blade are going to be attack related or speed related or stamina related. That's basically it. Obviously crits too, but that's basically it. So it's not super complex. It's very easy to pick up. It's very easy to learn. Where the skill gap may come in between is when you do need to, figure out the monster where you need to dodge. But personally, that's really it when it comes to the dual blades. Now let's go over to our tier list, and we are going to move this to the easy to use category, because again, I think this weapon is fairly simple to use, fairly easy to build up, and there's nothing crazy about the weapon itself that's just going to make you go, oh my goodness, this is like very difficult to understand. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is the lance. Now, the lance here is one of my least used weapons, but I do have some experience with it. Now, this weapon, you have your lance and your shields. The mechanics that you need to understand while using this is going to be how to guard the monster. It's probably one of the safest weapons to use. Again, this weapon is not super complex either. When it comes to building the weapon too, it's not anything crazy. The things that you need to worry about, of course, your attack skills and your defense skills, but that's really it. It's quite easy to build. It's quite easy to use. It's very straightforward. There's not a lot of mechanics with it, so I mean, personally, I don't think this weapon is super hard to use, and I think it's quite user-friendly. Now, this is a weapon that will be very difficult to master, but just picking it up day one and using the lance itself, I don't think it's too crazy, personally. Now, we are going to move the lance here. Too simple, but hard to master. So again, I think it's something you could pick up day one, use it. You're not going to have any crazy issues. And, I think it's something that's somewhat easy to figure out. Next, we have the bow. Now, the bow is one of the strongest weapons in the game. But one of the strongest weapons in the game in every single Monster Hunter game. And in Monster Hunter Wilds, it still looks simple, but there are some different mechanics to it that you will have to learn and get used to. Now, this weapon again, it's quite simple, right? You just pick up the bow, you shoot the monster, you stay from a distance, whether it's close range, medium range, or whatever, and you kind of dodge. I mean, that's basically it. It's not anything super crazy, nothing to brag about. Again, very high damage. Personally, I think it's somewhat easy to use. I have a lot of experience using this weapon. I've used it multiple times. I use it in every single game too. I personally enjoy the bow. I think it's one of my favorite weapons in the game too. But in terms of just kind of picking it up and using it day one, you know, it's somewhat simple. So for this, I'm going to definitely move it in the category of it's simple, but it's kind of hard to master. Again, building for the bow, you're going to need things like attack, crit boost, stamina. Those are just the main three things you're going to use. And you know, again, it's one of those things like it's pretty simple to pick up, but it's kind of difficult to master and understand. But as a day one user, I personally wouldn't recommend the bow, I guess, just because there's a few things that you just need to understand as far as your, you know, range of where you're going to be. You typically have lower defense when you have a bow. Again, I don't think it's super complex, but it is. I wouldn't say it's like a day one weapon. I wouldn't say that at all. Okay. Next, we have my personal favorite, the Switch Axe. Now, I've used this weapon more than any other weapon in the game. It's my favorite weapon in the game, right? So, whenever I first use the Switch Axe, I don't think it's super easy to use. There are multiple mechanics that you have to understand. You have to understand that in axe mode, you're moving a little bit slower. In sword mode, you're moving a lot faster. You have to understand that there's two different modes. You have a gauge that you need to fill up. There's a lot that goes into understanding the Switch Axe. It's a very powerful weapon. Whenever you're building a Switch Axe, you're going to need things like your attack, your critical damage, your critical rates, things like that are very important. You're also going to need another thing. It's called a rapid morph. So that depends on when you're using your weapon. It morphs from an axe to a sword or a sword to an axe. You have to understand those things, and you got to build that in there somewhere. So building it is I want to say on the middle range. I don't want to say it's the easiest, and I don't want to say it's the hardest, but this weapon here, in my personal opinion, when it comes to ranking, I will say it is quite complex, just with the mechanics that you have to understand with how to use this weapon. Now, next we have the sword and shield. And when it comes to these weapons, I'd probably say the sword and shield is probably the most basic weapon in the game. It's nothing flashy. You have a sword and a shield. I mean, it's your typical weapon that you'll see in a lot of fighting games. So yeah, it's not super complex. There's nothing crazy about it. You don't really have to learn too many mechanics with it. I personally think as a first day player, the sword and shield is literally the perfect weapon to use, because again, it's not super hard to understand. There's not crazy mechanics behind it. It's very easy to build. It's very simple to learn, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what else to say about it. So you already know where I'm going with this one. I'm going to easy to use, and I will actually put it in front of the dual blades. Now, this doesn't mean anything personally, but I mean, I guess it does, right? I'm moving it here to just show that it's, in my personal opinion, the easiest weapon in the game to kind of understand and use. Okay, next we have the light bowgun. Out of all the ranged weapons, I think this one is probably going to be the easiest to understand and easiest to use. I would definitely say this could be a day one weapon that you could use. The most important thing you need to understand while using the bow is just your distance, understanding where you are. You do have different ammo types, but it's not hard to understand, right? Some of them are dragon type or ice type, or maybe you have a cluster, or maybe you have a rapid shot. You know, all these are terms that are somewhat simple, right? So I think the light bow gun, again, out of all the guns, is probably the easiest one to use. And I do think this could be a day one weapon when you are using it. It's not super complex. It's quite easy to build too. There aren't too many mechanics that come with it. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, you just kind of shoot the gun. You have little things that you can put into the ground. I know it's kind of showed here pretty soon. But they're like little bombs that you put in the ground. But it's nothing crazy, I guess, right? So this is something that I find to be quite simple to use, and we are going to rate this one easy to use. This one I'm not going to move anywhere. I don't think I'm going to move anything anywhere else in terms of just that on the board itself. Okay, for our next weapon, we are going to talk about the hammer. And as far as a day one weapon, I think the hammer is another one that you can pick up fairly easy, right? With the hammer, all you have to do is hit the monster on the damn head and stun it. That's it. Now in Wilds, there is a counter mechanic that is in the game. That's about it, right? You knock out the monster. That's it. I mean, there's really nothing else to say about the hammer. It is a very strong weapon. It is pretty badass to use. When you get those stuns, it feels good. I mean, even just watching the trailer, they're just showing you that, hey, you just stunned the monster. You knock his ass out. That's it. So as a day one weapon, I think this one is a very good one for people to get into. Of course, there's different skills that you can do and blah de blah, but when it comes down to it, the hammer is quite easy to use and understand. Now, I'm not saying all this stuff, and I don't take all air hammer mains out there for granted, because what you guys do out there when stunning the monster, it is quite important. It's nice, and we thank you guys for all of your hard work and service. But you know, when it comes to the easy use of this weapon, it's quite easy. When it comes to building the weapon, again, it's also quite easy. The things that you're looking for when you're building this weapon are attacks, critical damage, and then KO and stun. I mean, that's it. That's really it. Again, I like the weapon. It's a very fun weapon to use, but it's quite straightforward and it's quite simple to use. So I will throw this up here to easy to use as well. Now, for our other weapon, we have the most popular weapon in every Monster Hunter game, is the longsword. Now this weapon too is pretty easy to use, but it's quite hard to understand, right? It's a lot of hack and slash, kind of like how the dual blades is, but the mechanics behind this weapon are quite complex. As we just saw, you have this move where you can dodge the monster. This means you have to understand how the monster fights. You have to time it very well. This move here too, there's a lot of understanding the monster when it comes to the longsword. I will say it is one of the coolest weapons to watch someone do like a speed run in or something. It's just so badass. Now building the weapon, it's somewhat easy. I mean, you have your attack, crit boost. You have a thing called quick sheath. It's just how fast you put the weapon up. But, you know, it's just a badass weapon, so I understand why this weapon is always the #1 weapon in every single game. But I will say again, this weapon is quite simple to understand, like fundamentally, like it's not something that's gonna rack your brain, but mastering the skills that you have can be quite the challenge. And when you do that though, it is the most rewarding and satisfying thing in the game. Well, there's another weapon that I'll talk about that's way more satisfying than this one, but for this one, I'm going to put in simple but hard to master. So I do think the longsword is a weapon that you can pick up day one, but you may not master it day one. You know what I mean? Okay, next we have the hunting horn. First thing I want to say to all my hunting horn mains out there, thank you for all your hard work and all your service. You guys are unreminded, and everything that you guys do get overlooked a lot. Now, with that being said, the hunting horn is known as your only support type weapon because you can heal your team, you can buff your team. There's just multiple things that the hunting horn can do. Now, with that being said, this weapon is pretty easy to, I guess, get the concept of it. Is, you know, it's just like the hammer, right? You just kind of go for the head and you stun the monster. That's it when it comes to that part of it. But there are a lot of mechanics that come with the hunting horn. Every hunting horn plays music, and every song that you play, depending on the hunting horn that you're using, it's gonna have different buffs, right? Or debuffs towards the monster. And that is a mechanic that you'll have to understand while using the hunting horn. Because yes, you can go out and swing willy-nilly, knock a monster out like the hammer, but if you want to fully understand and optimize this weapon and use it to the best of its abilities, you have to understand what melodies do what weapons, what different melodies each weapon has. Building for this weapon is kind of quite simple in terms of, it's like the hammer, right? Attack, crit, KO, but there's another thing called Horn Maestro, and what that does is it just makes all of your abilities a lot better with the hunting horn itself. It's gonna give you different boosts. Again, you know, right here it talks about different blunt weapon that can perform melodies that give you buffs. So you can increase people's stamina, you can increase people's attack, you can negate wind damage because there's wind monsters. You can every monster, or not every monster, but a lot of monsters roar in the game, and a roar kind of stuns you where you cannot move, but you can buff your teammates where whenever a monster roars, it doesn't stun you or stop you from attacking. So it's a very phenomenal weapon. Again, it's very underappreciated, and I think it's one of the most just cool, versatile weapons in the game. Now, with all of that being said, I will have to rank the hunting horn complex. Now, people may argue with that, and that's okay. Some people may it's simple, but it's hard to master. But I personally think it's complex because of everything that you have to understand while using the weapon. Okay, next we have the gun lance. Now, the gun lance is another one of the weapons that I don't use that much, but I do watch people like Rurikhan. I watch him use it, and he's phenomenal with it. The gun lance, just like the lance, but you have a gun. Now, with saying that, you would think that I'm going to say this weapon is simple just because of how I explained it, but by God, it is not at all. The mechanics that you have to understand with this weapon are quite complex, right? You have to understand how to guard, when to do things like this. I don't know, there's a lot to it, right? You have a lot of different move sets. You have a lot of utility with the weapon. It's just one of those weapons that it's going to take time for you to actually understand how to use a weapon. It's not as simple as the lance where you just block with your shield and poke. It's not at all. Now, you can do that with this weapon, but that means you're not fully utilizing the weapon, right? Because you have a whole gun. And with the gun, you have to understand things like long shelling, short shelling, wide shelling. You also have to understand how far are you away from the monster to get off moves like you just saw. This one right here. You have to understand, oh, I'm close enough where I can do this. Because you can whiff this move too. And it is not fun when you do it, because you have to then reload the weapon. Guys, this weapon is quite complex. I would not recommend this as a day one weapon. Now this one, again, you'll need a lot of time to use, a lot of time to understand. Building this weapon is also quite complex too, because yes, you do have your attack, your defense, your shield, things like that, but things you also have to consider for your shelling type. You have to use the thing, it's called artillery. It's going to give you more shells. There's a lot, okay? I could literally take a whole day to explain everything that you have to do with the gun lance. And with that being said, to no one's surprise, I am throwing this one in complex because it is quite a complex weapon. I know it seems simple in terms of just talking about it, but it's pretty complex. Next, we have the insect glaive, which I probably would say is my third favorite weapon in the entire game. A few mechanics that you have to understand are you can fight on the ground, you can fight in the air, you have this thing on your arm, it is a little bug, it's an insect, right? So you put two and two together, right? This is the insect, this is the glaive. Now, with the insect glaive, you have this little meter up here that you have to understand. You throw the bug out and you hit 3 different parts of the monster to fill these 3 different portions of the weapon. You have your attack, or your red one, you have a white one, and you have an orange one. Now, depending on the monster, that's where you're gonna, it all depends on where you're gonna hit the monster. The red one, like you see here, is the most aggressive part of the monster. So some monsters are very aggressive with their tail. That means in order to get the red portion here, you have to attack, you have to use it on the tail. Now some of them, they're most aggressive with their heads. Maybe they blow fire or whatever. So then that means the red one's going to be on their head. Now the white one and the orange one, those depend on, again, just what the monster is. Sometimes the orange one is the tail. Sometimes the orange one is the legs. Sometimes the red one's the legs. Sometimes the white one's the legs. So you have to understand different monsters and understand just what they are and who they are. Now, that's just that part of it, okay? You also have different bugs. Now, the bugs are called kinsects. That's the actual name of what these guys are called. You have multiple bugs. There's ones that are fast. There's ones that are powerful. There's ones that stun. There's one that cut tails. There's different bugs like this where you see in the corner where you can pick up 2 different colors. Some monsters, you hit their head and you get a red and a white. But that is on this specific kinsect. Some kinsects are just 1, where you hit the head and you only get red. So there's a lot to this weapon, okay? And there's way more that I'm not explaining because, again, this is one of those weapons where I can make a whole video and take all day to explain. But building this weapon is also quite easy. You have your attacks, you have your crits, you have your evasive maneuvers, you have your things that are going to boost you in the air. So it's not super hard to build, but it is something that is it's quite complex, right, to say the least. So obviously with me explaining all that, this weapon will go into complex because it is complex. I mean, everything that I was just saying to explain it, that doesn't even do justice to what this weapon is and what it can do. So I would not recommend this as a day 1 weapon unless you love complex weapons and you want to figure this weapon out. I wouldn't recommend it, number 1. Now, next we have 3 more weapons, right? We just have 3 more weapons to go through. Next, we have the heavy bow gun. This is, of course, another gun weapon. Now, the heavy bow gun is different than the light bow gun because you're going to be moving a lot slower, okay? You have a shield with this one versus the light bow gun, you don't. So, in most games, the way to block with this weapon is you don't move at all and it auto blocks. As you can see here, I mean, it just says you auto guard. You don't move, it blocks by itself, which is a very cool mechanic. Now, with that being said, that is like the most complex part of the heavy bow gun. It's just like the bow gun where you know your distances, you know your ammo types, and you know, it's not super hard to build. Yes, guns do vary, right? Some are like machine guns like this, some are shotguns, but you know, once you understand those mechanics about it, it's not super hard to understand. Now the being slow part is difficult. Whenever you roll, you're not going to roll as fast as you do with the light bow gun. So those are just things to consider. I think this could be a day one weapon if you want it to be. I don't think it's super complex. And with that, I will rate it here as simple, but hard to master. Just because whenever you do guard, sometimes you can get really greedy when you're shooting your weapon, right? In these cases like this, right? You have a machine gun, maybe you're popping off on the monster, but the monster's charging you and you don't stop an auto block, or maybe you try an auto block, but hey, you're a little too late. So that's something that you do have to understand, and that's what makes it a little bit harder to master than the other gun weapons. And yeah, I mean, that's all I really got to say about the heavy bow gun. Next, we have another fan favorite weapon. It's always in the top, probably top 4, I'd say. It is the Greatsword. Now, with that title, we've seen the Greatsword in a lot of other games. Like, it's just a very popular weapon. It is a big ass sword that provides big ass damage. That is the best way to explain it. Now, with that being said, in Monster Hunter games, the Greatsword is very easy to pick up, right? But it's extremely difficult to master. It's probably one of the hardest weapons to master. One of the hardest, not the hardest, because you have to understand timing. It is very, very, very important. Like the move that they just did, this isn't a series of 3 different moves. This is the final move that you do. It's hard to master because sometimes you'll get 2 off and then the monster roars, you don't get your final move, or maybe you whiff the final move. But in like daily practice, I guess it's like simple to understand. I think this could be a day one weapon if you want to. But trying to master this weapon, my God, you are going to have a, I don't want to say a hard time, but it's going to take some time, because you not only have to understand the weapon, the distances, the sharpness, all of these things you are going to have to understand. But the most important is whiffing your attacks, because you do that, you will get punished by the monster. You will. They will destroy you every single time. So with this weapon, I will throw it on simple but hard to master. Again, with any of these weapons, guys, feel free to let me know how you personally feel about these weapons. Again, these are my opinions. I don't think I'm 100% right on everything that I'm saying, because everyone is entitled to their own opinions and their own thoughts about everything in this game. Now, arguably, my favorite weapon in the game. And I say that because I'm biased to the switch axe and I've used that since day one. I just love the charge blade. Now, the name itself is quite complex. You see this and you're like, huh, what even is this weapon? Now, this weapon is a multiple weapon. Like, it's multi-faced. When you look at it like this, you just see, oh, it's just a sword and a shield. But this weapon can actually switch, okay, to a axe, okay? And when you do this, there's also different modes with the axe. You can turn it into a little chainsaw, which is, you'll see it later in the trailer. Now, things you need to master with this weapon, there's a thing called guard pointing, and we'll also see that a little bit later in the trailer. And up here in the left corner, you have a sword, a shield, and then you have your axe. These are the 3 different things that you can charge on your weapon. You have different files. So the way that this works is you attack the monster, it builds up your files here. You have to then store your files, and then when you store your files, you can put them into the sword, the shield, or you can put them in the axe. Now let's let this play out a little bit, and then we will just kind of talk a little bit more. So whenever you are filling your files, when you are using the blade mode of it or your axe mode, you will use these files. Okay, then of course you just have to recharge them again. Now when you do have them fully charged, like all the way charged, you can do something that is called a, let's see, let's go to it here. Okay, you can do this beautiful move here. Okay, you get them all charged up, and then you go into this amped discharge where it uses all of your files. So then you have to recharge all your files again, but it is so worth it because, oh, actually that's them just charging the shields. Sorry. And then this is them charging the sword. Okay. Now what you can do is once you have these things charged up, sorry, let me actually go back. Let me go back. Once you have these things charged up, they do function differently. Okay. When you block with your shield, when it's charged up, you can block stronger attacks that you couldn't block before when it wasn't charged. When you have your sword charged up, you can stun the monster with your sword attacks here. As you can see, this little thing, this little pop that you see that's like electricity, those are like stunning things. So you can now stun with that weapon. Also, whenever your thing is in axe mode, you can do something like this, where you are literally shredding the monster with the shield. So just to show you guys again, the shield is up here and the shield is spinning. Okay, it is spinning. It's like a literal chainsaw on the monster. It's absolutely insane. What they just did there is the guard points. That's another thing that you need to learn with the weapon. And this is the move that I was talking about. Once you have your files charged, your sword charged, your axe charged, you can do this move here where you put all of your files in this attack here. You hit the monster, and then all of the files hit the monster. As you just saw, they proc and they just kind of flow through the monster. Guys, I would need like 5 hours to explain to you everything that this weapon can do. I mean, you guys can tell I was stumbling in everything that I was saying, trying to explain all of the mechanics with this weapon. Now, this weapon is not only very difficult to build because you have your attack, you have your crit, you have your defense things, you have the things that make your files stronger, you have things that give you more files. There's a lot, okay, that goes into building this weapon and using this weapon and understanding this weapon. But when you do, it is the most satisfying thing ever. Once you understand how to do your guard points, which means when the monster is attacking you, you block it, and then you get to, punish the monster off of that block. Once you understand how to do that with the charge blade, oh my god, day and night, right? It's day and night with this weapon. It is just so beautiful, right? And now with this weapon, after me saying all that, I am literally going to create its own tier, okay? And we are just going to name it the charge blade. And we're going to put it here because it is by far the most complex weapon, if I can fucking grab it, in the entire game. But once you master it, it's the most rewarding, best weapon that you would ever use. Okay, so this is it. This is my tier list. Again, if you don't like it, that is okay. You do not have to. But everything that I have on the top here, I say these are some day one weapons that you can just kind of learn and use to kind of just understand the game. Next, we have our tier here. You can still start with these day one, because they're kind of easy to use, but in order to master them, it will take time and dedication. Then the third tier, I would not recommend these to use on your first day unless you want to, unless you're a fan of complex weapons, which I personally am, because the switch axe and charge blade are my favorite weapons, and the insect glaive. You know, I wouldn't recommend them to be day one. But again, it's up to you. If that's what you want to do, then that's what you want to do. And then, of course, we have the charge blade in its own category because there's a lot to it. And I definitely do not recommend this day one. Unless you want a challenge and want to understand how to work this weapon, then I'd say, yeah, go ahead and use a charge blade by any means. Again, these are my personal opinions. You can use whatever weapons you want, or whatever weapons you want to use on day one. And I would actually encourage you to use different weapons, right? Because they're giving us the demo. I think it's for a week or something. I don't fully remember the days. But I'd say use all 14 weapons, okay, to see which one you like the most. But again, these are just the easiest to use and pick up. So if you just want to play the game and kind of just play it, right, these are the weapons to just use. But again, I would encourage you to use every single weapon so you understand which weapons you like. So don't take my word for this list. Make this list for yourself. Make these opinions for yourself too. And choose whatever weapon you want to use. Play with it however you want to play it. I like to use all 14 weapons other than the lance and the gun lance. I will eventually get to those, but I like to use every weapon in the game. Just me personally. I don't like to call myself a master of one. I just like to use them all. But I hope this tier list helped you guys out. If it did, please let me know. If it didn't, please let me know. That's fine too, you know? But I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. It means a lot to me. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will catch you guys in the demo.